I'm a 30-year-old woman engaged to Joseph Mayo, who's 32. We got engaged a few months ago, but haven't begun planning our wedding. We currently live separately because I'm the primary caregiver for my mother. My parents divorced a few years back, and ever since, I've taken on the role of taking care of my mother. It's not because she's old or physically incapable. Rather, she's never worked a day in her life and doesn't earn her own income. I'm the sole breadwinner of the family. And despite a less than ideal upbringing marked by my mother's narcissistic tendencies and strict standards, I can't bring myself to leave her alone. Recently, my sister Maria, who is 37, faced some marital troubles. She called our mother in tears, explaining that her husband Carl, who is 40, had kicked her out of the house, and they were heading for a divorce. Maria was devastated and unable to speak through her tears when she reached our home. After calming down, she revealed that her husband was furious about her spending habits, despite the fact that she's a stay-at-home wife with traditional gender role expectations. Despite Carl initially accepting these arrangements, the rising cost of living led to arguments between them. Maria dipped into their savings to splurge on unnecessary luxury items and services, leading to the final straw. Carl felt he couldn't work long hours only to come home to a wife who refused to grasp the financial difficulties they were facing. I sympathized with Carl to some extent, given Maria's spending tendencies. However, neither my mother nor Maria saw eye to eye with Carl's perspective, which was not surprising, considering their history as non-contributors who had never held a job. Maria divided the household chores with Carl, expecting him to come home from work and cook as well, which seemed overwhelming for him. I couldn't help but feel for him in this situation. I knew it wasn't the right time to confront Maria about her actions, especially when she was already heartbroken. I offered Maria a place to stay with us for as long as she needed, despite requiring some budget adjustments on my part. It was the right thing to do since she had nowhere else to go. The initial days were challenging as we all adjusted to this new living arrangement. Maria's emotional breakdowns were frequent, and I couldn't help but empathize with her situation. During one of her moments of vulnerability, she suggested that out of respect for her divorce and her grieving period, I should postpone my wedding for at least 3 years. She felt this would give her time to process her divorce. I stared at her in utter disbelief because there was no way I was going to postpone my wedding for her. When I looked at Mom, she simply nodded in agreement, as if this was a perfectly reasonable suggestion. I firmly declined and retreated upstairs to my room. Imagine my shock when, 2 weeks later, I spotted her in a cafe with Joseph, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. Joseph had told me he had errands to run, and I had no idea he was meeting up with my sister. I was livid, and I confronted them, but Maria brushed me off, claiming she was merely trying to be friendly with a new member of the family. I found this behavior utterly unacceptable, especially coming from Joseph, who was well aware of my strained relationship with my mother and sister. I stormed home and confided in Mom about what I had witnessed. To my astonishment, she remained nonchalant, stating that it was okay because Joseph was good-looking and she needed the confidence boost. According to her, who else to turn to for such reassurance than family? I couldn't believe my ears. I reminded her that Joseph technically wasn't even family, considering they didn't want me marrying him for the next 3 years. Yet, here she was, cozying up to my fiancé as if it were nothing. Mom casually asserted that this was how things were and warned me to prepare for Joseph to leave me, citing Maria's attractiveness as an inevitability that would lead men astray. I couldn't fathom my own mother, whom I supported, saying something so hurtful. I realized I needed to rid my life of this negativity, both from Mom and Maria. Determined, I put my plan into motion. I began searching for one-bedroom condos to rent and shortlisted a few job options that either my mom or Maria could pursue to support themselves. I was tired of being their cash cow and emotional punching bag. After a couple of weeks, I found a suitable place not far from my workplace. I kept my distance from Joseph, deciding to give them the silent treatment, as my mind was already burdened with too much. I had made up my mind to end things with Joseph due to his concerning connection with my sister. Once I had everything arranged, I called for a family meeting in the living room. I told Mom and Maria that I was moving out. Although I had covered the rent for the upcoming month, they would have to figure out their situation afterward. Maria had the audacity to laugh at my decision, but I was dead serious. I handed them a list of jobs I had researched, explaining that these positions could cover their basic expenses. I made it clear that I was done being taken advantage of by them. All they did was take from me, offering no emotional support in return. My mother reacted hysterically, yelling and breaking things, labeling me a monster and a terrible daughter for doing this to them. I stood my ground, stating that if I was a monster, so be it. I was done catering to their needs. I felt liberated, even though I knew this drastic step was necessary. I questioned if I was being too harsh on my mother and sister, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to cut ties with them. Joseph finally called me, puzzled about my cold demeanor. I shared my new address and updated him on the situation. I revealed that Maria had been flirting with him, and my mother had implicitly encouraged it. Joseph showed me a text from my mom, claiming they were planning a surprise birthday party for me. He had met Maria at the cafe, expecting both of them to be there. However, my mother had backed out at the last minute, leaving Maria to be overly flirtatious. Joseph sensed something was wrong and wanted to share this with me, but my distant attitude had prevented him from doing so. I apologized for my behavior, and I asked him to cut off all contact with my family and block them, which he promptly did. Joseph and I reconciled, but with this new information about my family, I knew forgiveness was beyond reach. Our wedding date has been set, and despite the overwhelming details and planning ahead, I'm filled with excitement. I cannot wait for this new chapter of my life to begin. On another note, my mother has found a job somewhere, but she continues to hurl insults at me whenever she gets the chance. I remain undisturbed, having cut all ties with both her and Maria. I've deliberately removed their negativity from my life, and since moving out, I've found immense happiness. Today, I had my first dress fitting, and I felt absolutely beautiful. Although I missed my mother and wished she could be there, I was surrounded by an amazing group of friends who offered their unwavering support. My aunt, a motherly figure to me, drove down to help, and she's been incredibly supportive throughout the entire wedding planning process. Joseph's family has also been remarkably helpful and understanding. Paul, one of Joseph's relatives, reached out to offer his assistance. He assured me that I could call him anytime if I needed help with the wedding preparations. He's even invited to the wedding, unlike my mother and Maria, a fact that now makes me chuckle. While there are moments when I find myself missing my mother, deep down, I know that removing her from my life was the best decision I could have made. I'm embracing this new chapter with positivity and surrounded by people who genuinely care about my happiness. Diego, congratulations on your wedding. I'm delighted to see you surrounded by such supportive people now. I'm incredibly proud of you for standing up for yourself. Good job. Let them wallow in their misery and complaints. You don't owe them a thing after all you've done for them. Focus on your future and let them stay in the past where they belong. As for my own story, I'm a 27-year-old woman who has been a sleepwalker since I was 7 years old. This condition has been a part of my life, with periods of respite ranging from a few weeks to a few months. Every person I've dated has known about my sleepwalking, and my now husband Julian, a 30-year-old man, was no exception. He found it amusing and accepted it without hesitation. However, Julian's mother never warmed up to me, and her disapproval seemed unrelated to my sleepwalking. She simply felt I wasn't good enough for her son. Julian consistently stood up for me, defending our relationship. When he informed her of our decision to get married, he firmly shut down any unnecessary comments, forcing her into reluctant silence. For a few weeks before our wedding, Julian's mother had to move in with us due to a minor accident she had. Sharing a space with her was something I dreaded, but I accepted it since it was Julian's duty to care for his mother. We got married 10 days ago, and as expected, my mother-in-law found fault with everything I did. On the first night, she witnessed me sleepwalking and screamed in fear. Unaware of her reaction due to my condition, I continued my sleepwalking routine. Julian found the situation rather amusing and recounted the entire incident the next morning. Mother-in-law, frightened, called me names like witch, but Julian intervened, explaining my condition to her. Despite his explanation, she remained resentful, considering me a threat due to her religious beliefs, which had not influenced Julian during his upbringing. I calmly clarified my condition to her, but she remained unconvinced. The real blow came one night when mother-in-law insisted I sleep away from Julian to prevent my demonic habits from affecting him. She even threatened to lock me outside to protect her son from what she perceived as my affliction. I gazed at her in utter disbelief, but her expression remained deadly serious. On the other hand, Julian couldn't contain his laughter. He told his mom to leave us alone and assured her that we'd see her tomorrow. After a lingering stare at me, she eventually left the room. The following morning, I awoke to find myself on the porch, bewildered about how I had ended up there. My mother-in-law suggested I might have picked the lock and gone outside, a possibility that didn't seem far-fetched, considering I had done it a couple of times as a child. I brushed it off as a rare occurrence and carried on with my day. However, the next day, I found myself on the porch again, which was strange because such a pattern had never occurred before. I discussed my concerns with Julian, who shared my worry. He decided to have cameras installed around the house and promised to check on me periodically during the night. I appreciated his concern and cooperation, but requested him not to inform his mother about the cameras. While the camera company was setting up, I accompanied mother-in-law to her regular doctor visits. We maintained a silent distance, a situation that suited me just fine. Upon our return from the doctor's appointment, the cameras had been installed. The following morning, I once again found myself on the porch, confirming my suspicions that something was amiss, and I suspected my mother-in-law's involvement. Observing her unusual smugness over the past few days, I quietly went upstairs and reviewed the footage from the cameras. Suddenly, it all fell into place. My mother-in-law had been scheming behind my back. She would rise in the middle of the night, open the main door wide, while ensuring all the internal doors were closed. When I, sleepwalking, ventured outside due to the open door, she would shoot and bolt it shut, preventing my return. In the early hours of the morning, she would discreetly reopen the latch to suggest that the door wasn't locked, creating a false narrative that I had gone out on my own. I couldn't fathom the extent of her deceit, especially considering her supposed illness, yet here she was, plotting to keep me away from my husband at night. I felt an urgent need to tell Julian about my discovery, but I knew he was overwhelmed with work and had to leave on a 2-day business trip that night. Realizing that this situation had become increasingly dangerous, I decided I had to confront his mother on my own. A part of me wanted to confront her directly, but the vengeful side of me sought to make her understand the consequences of her actions. I reached out to my dad, knowing he had connections in the area due to his realtor background. He had maintained good relations with many people, including the man in whose house my mother-in-law resided. It was my dad's influence that had secured her a place at a lower rent. I asked him to call the man and persuade him to increase the rent for my mother-in-law starting next month. Meanwhile, I continued to document the sleepwalking incidents, ensuring I had evidence of her deceit every morning. When Julian returned home, I revealed his mother's actions to him. Initially, he was skeptical, but after viewing the recordings, he became furious. He confronted his mother, informing her that she was no longer welcome in our home. She attempted to justify herself, claiming she was protecting him from the same demons she believed possessed me. Julian firmly told her she needed to leave immediately. She reacted with tears and tantrums, but Julian stood his ground. Though she left reluctantly, I knew life would only get tougher for her. I questioned whether I was in the wrong for standing up against my mother-in-law. A week passed since her departure. The sleepwalking continued, but at least I no longer ventured outside the house. Today, my mother-in-law called, sounding upset and anxious, discussing her financial struggles. She expressed a desire to live with us. Julian firmly rejected her request, refusing to jeopardize my safety. She asked for money, but Julian declined, emphasizing that her affordable housing had been arranged due to my dad's connections, making it clear that she couldn't exploit my parents' contacts while mistreating me. Eventually, she said she wanted to apologize to me, but I told Julian that I had no interest in her drama and requested her to leave me alone. I'm not concerned about how my mother-in-law plans to arrange the money. She will likely have to downsize, but Julian and I are adamant that she won't be living with us. She has moved to a smaller place, which is thankfully further away from us. However, she has completely vilified me, spreading negative comments about me on Facebook. While I usually avoid such drama, Julian refused to tolerate it. He publicly exposed her mistreatment of me, leading other family members to turn against her and call her out on her behavior. Since then, there has been a significant silence on her end. Julian and I are currently enjoying our honeymoon in Italy. We've explored Rome and are heading to Venice, Milan, and Bologna. If time allows, we might visit other countries, but our main focus is Italy. My mother-in-law was bitter when she found out about our trip to Italy and attempted to make amends. However, I know her true intentions now. Julian has left any possibility of reconciliation up to me, respecting my decision not to reconcile with her. Mother-in-law tried to play the victim on Facebook again, but she was promptly shut down by others. It was quite satisfying, and I can't help but revel in my pettiness. I'm grateful to have a supportive husband who stood up against his mother for me, as not all spouses are willing to do so. I'm looking forward to the rest of my life with Julian, enjoying every moment. Thank you for your kind words and support. Remember, if you have your own story to share, feel free to email us at the address provided in the description. Your engagement with the channel through likes and subscriptions is greatly appreciated. We'll be back soon with more stories. Thank you for tuning in.